going on, guys? Welcome to a random video on this channel. Shout out to everyone subscribing to the channel, liking the videos. That's awesome. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Samsung Galaxy S8 and also the Galaxy S8 Plus. Now, these are the newest smartphones from Samsung. A lot of people are hyping it up. You know it's hype city out there when people are talking about Samsung, because soon enough, Apple is going to be announcing their new iPhones and people are going to be talking about which phone's the best. Already people are saying Samsung's better than Apple. And by the way, I am a fan of Android. I actually think Android is better than iOS. That's just my personal opinion. I've also used Android Studio to actually use Android, not just on your phone, so you can actually learn about how Android works by using Android Studio. It's an awesome IDE. But as far as these phones, and the reason why I would think that a lot of people are impressed by what Samsung is doing is because obviously Samsung had to create something much better than what happened with the Galaxy Note 7, because that phone was recalled. And this phone in particular, what's interesting to me is the design. Obviously, a lot of people are looking at the design of this phone. It's much more narrow than phones before that Samsung has created. Also, you're seeing the fact that you do not have a physical button. That is something that I thought Apple would do, and it's possible with the new iPhone you might see that as well. Now, as far as what you get with these phones, the S8 and the S8 Plus, both phones are available in black, gray, blue, silver, and gold. Now, of course, if you're a fan of Android, and even if you're not, if you're interested in specs about a phone, this is a phone that you want to pay attention to as far as the specs, because with the Galaxy S8, the screen is 5.8 inches, and with the Galaxy S Plus, you're going to get 6.2 inches. Both phones have a resolution of 2960 by 1440, and with the Galaxy S8, it's 570 ppi, and with the Galaxy S8 Plus, it's 529 ppi. So you're talking about an impressive resolution screen for both phones. Now, the Samsung Galaxy S8 Plus, because it's a larger phone, it's slightly heavier, but not that much of a difference. So both phones, from the reviews that I was watching, it seems like it's a lightweight phone. I haven't used the phone myself. I'm just talking about my first opinions from what I've seen out there, because there's a lot of reviews. Everybody wanted to talk about this as soon as they saw that Samsung was announcing the phone. But when you talk about features of this phone, one of the things that a lot of people talk about, obviously, is the camera. Both phones have 12 megapixel cameras. They could both record in 4K. And you're talking about phones that both have 64 gigabytes of storage and 4 gigabytes of RAM. And by the way, when we talk about the camera, it's actually 12 megapixels for the back-facing camera, and the front-facing camera, it's 8 megapixels. So both phones have the same camera. And you know what's interesting about this is that when Samsung announced this phone, they're talking really more about the design because they thought they really figured it out. Now, I have one criticism about the design of the phone, and that's because I think it's way too narrow with the Galaxy S8 Plus. That's because with the Galaxy S8 Plus, you're looking at a phone that's supposed to be more of like a phablet, because right now, when you look at that phone, to me, it looks like it's too stretched out and too narrow. So I think the design of this phone, the Galaxy S8 Plus, not necessarily with the Galaxy S8, because if it's narrow and people use it, that's fine. But we're talking about the S8 Plus. Because you have a phone with a larger screen and you made it more narrow, phones change all the time. You guys know that. The designs change. But as far as this design, I think it could be improved. Now, as far as anything else with these phones, both of them have USB-C. The prices were not announced. I think they said like the third week in April, the phones are going to be available. And a lot of mobile carriers are talking about these phones already. I saw T-Mobile talking about this phone, even Sprint. So there's a lot of companies that are going to have this phone. All the major mobile carriers are going to have this phone. That's including T-Mobile, Verizon, Sprint, and AT&T. Now, another feature I thought was also interesting about these phones is the water resistance, because obviously a lot of people are talking about water-resistant phones out there, or water-resistant technology. But that does not mean waterproof. And I'm explaining that again because when people think water resistant, they're like, hey, you could just throw your phone in water. It's not like that. What water resistance is to a certain point, water can get onto the phone. I already see Samsung talking about that, whether you want to go into a pool or something with your phone. But really, they're saying water resistant, obviously, because it's not waterproof. Now, we also have another interesting thing with the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus. It's an additional feature to the phone because Samsung has TouchWiz. It's a feature they have that's similar to Google Now. And the fact that Samsung is continuing to do stuff like this, it's just more reason to ask the question to Samsung, what exactly are you guys trying to do with the OS on your phone? Because it's an Android phone, but you guys have TouchWiz, and you continue to try to resemble what Google is doing, but you don't want to sell the phone with Tizen and your own OS, but you continuously try to duplicate what Google is doing. And what it means to me is that you really need Android fans to purchase your phone. Yes, you might get Apple fans, but a lot of people out there that like Apple, because Apple has that brand loyalty, Apple's going to announce another phone, and those loyal fans are going to go to Apple. So I think Samsung realizes this. Yes, some fans might go to Samsung for this phone, but a lot of people realize when Apple announces a phone, especially if you're a fan of Apple, you want to see what Apple's doing with the iPhone. A lot of Apple fans are like that. Now, from what I know, and from my experience, TouchWiz continues to be an issue with Android phones because TouchWiz in itself is just an alternative to Android. It's an additional change to Android. It is not the way Android is developed by Google, so you have changes there where Samsung makes them, and I don't think that's the best Android experience. So if we're talking about actually using this phone, and you see that you have the curved edges, and that's something else a lot of people have noticed also, because usually Samsung would refer to this as edge, but they're not saying that anymore because maybe this is going to be the standard for Samsung where you have edges to the phone and there's edges on both sides of the phone, and again without the physical button. These are the kind of things that Samsung is doing to be different than their competition. But there is an issue here. The issue is trying to convince people, say that if they use an iPhone, to use a Samsung phone, a Samsung Galaxy phone. And then with the way I see that Samsung works on these issues, yes, some features to this phone are interesting, but the fact that you guys made the phone way too narrow, again, just my personal opinion, and also, if we're talking about the Galaxy S8 Plus, because that is the phone I would be looking at because I'm interested in a phone of that size, and if I compare that to the Galaxy S8, you have the same processors, the phones are very similar besides the fact that you're getting a larger screen with the Galaxy S8 Plus. So I have to start asking the questions, what exactly is Samsung trying to accomplish here? And I've seen some of the recent commercials from Samsung. I'm actually not really impressed with Samsung recently, and I am a fan of Samsung. I think their company is capable of a lot more. As far as these phones though, when they remove the physical button from the phone, I think that's great. And I also like the idea that they're trying to innovate the design of the phones and try to be different than the other companies out there. And then when we talk about what exactly Samsung is doing after that situation with the Galaxy Note 7, people are hyping this phone up. But the reason why they hyped the phone up, again, I've talked about this. They don't want to anger a lot of people out there that might have issues with people who criticize Samsung. And again, I am a fan of their company, and this channel is about real talk. I'm not impressed with them. And this phone, the Galaxy S8 Plus, is not a phone I would purchase because the design is way too narrow. And what it looks like is that Samsung wanted to implement a larger screen, but they were like, you know what? A lot of people complain with the larger screen because they said the phone was too big. You know, there's a lot of people out there that have small hands, I guess, or whatever. And Samsung was like, hey, we have to change that, make the phone more narrow. But guess what? Those larger phones are not for people with small hands. If you have small hands, use the Galaxy S8. The S8 Plus shouldn't be that narrow. And also, Samsung, when you guys have TouchWiz on your phone, and you're talking about new features that have to do with TouchWiz, your phones are becoming more like Tizen or whatever you're working on with a Samsung OS, and not really about Android. And I've been saying this for a while. The situation with Samsung and the way they work on phones, if you like the way the phone looks and you like the hardware, you might as well go out there, root the phone, and use Android on the phone. And again, some people might argue that and say, hey, that's Android, and it's just TouchWiz, and it's Android there. Yeah, that's what you're saying, but the experience is TouchWiz. And I know that because there's certain features with TouchWiz when I use the Galaxy phones, even features Samsung would change, and I was like, hey, you know, that was a cool feature, but Samsung changed it. It was a TouchWiz feature, and it was a change to the way Android was working on the phone, of course, because when you use that phone, you're using TouchWiz. So these phones, I think they're interesting. People are going to buy them, of course. You know, they're not awful, but I don't think that they're the best phones on the market when people start comparing it to new phones that are going to be available. And this is including when people compare this to the iPhone. Apple fans want to buy products from Apple. I think most people realize this by now, that Apple has a lot of brand loyalty. And if people think these phones are going to change what people think about the iPhone to the point where this is the standard in the market, it's not going to happen. And the funny thing is, even if Apple create phones like this, I would say the same thing. Yes, removing the physical button from the phone is interesting. That is a good idea. Then you look at the phone itself. Yes, it's different. Okay, that's interesting. And then we're talking about the size of the phone, design. Yes, people want larger screens, but the phone's too narrow. And the design is awkward. And after that situation with the Galaxy Note 7, Samsung really needs to improve the way people think about their company, even the way they sell these phones, which I think needs to change also. Samsung, you guys are doing a haphazard job trying to sell your phones right now. And I gotta say, as a Samsung fan, you guys gotta change that. That's real talk. Change the way you sell your phones. Really. I see what's going on out there. Just stop all that. You know, you got people talking about your phones that don't even know what's going on with the phones themselves. Don't be an HTC. Create the phones, manufacture them, let us know what the cool technology is about. This Galaxy S8 Plus, the design of it, they messed up. I'm saying that. because of the actual design itself is awkward. I'm not saying that you can't like the phone. There could be people that like the phone. You guys messed up on that. And I'm surprised because, like, how can you mess that up? How can you create a phone of that size and think the narrow screen is somehow great for people when all the people out there that are saying how great it is are the people that said,
hey, you know what? Previously with phablets, I don't know how people even hold the phone. But now, with the Galaxy S8 Plus, everybody can hold the phone.
yeah, you know what? With the Galaxy S8 Plus, it should be plus with the screen size, not a minus with the width of the phone. So again, that needs to change. And if people think that I'm annoyed with Samsung, I'm annoyed with Samsung to a point about all this because when they had to recall the phones with Galaxy Note 7, I was like, okay, they got to recall the phones. Then you look at these phones. And I'm like, you know, the Galaxy S8 is probably a better option for most people. I'm just saying that personally, what I think. And the Galaxy S8 Plus, it looks like a nice phone. I'm not saying that it looks cheap or anything else like that. I think both phones have a very nice design. But we're talking about a phone that you would want to purchase and also like the best phone in the market. And I'm not saying that design of that phone is the best phone in the market. That's me. But as far as the way the phone works and the hardware, I'm sure it's a great experience. But a better experience, in my opinion, is Android on those phones. And I'm talking about Android, stock version of Android. We're not talking about TouchWiz. We're talking about Android. The way Google develops Android. And forget about the features that Samsung has trying to duplicate what Google is doing. You know, because to me that doesn't make any sense. If you want to use features that are like Android features, you should be using Android. It's like using an iPhone and using iOS and saying, you know what would be fantastic? If we had Google Now on this phone. You know what? You don't because you're using an iPhone. So it's the same thing with the TouchWiz phone. If you purchase that phone and you want to use TouchWiz, then you're going to get what TouchWiz has available. I'm saying for me personally, these are not the best phones on the market the way they are. If I purchase either one of these phones, I'll be using Android on it. Android from Google. I'm just saying what I would change to make the phones even better. Now, there's a lot of people out there. When you guys talk about these phones, and this is an issue also when people review phones, you know there's going to be a lot of nonsense out there. People only want to create reviews about these phones and celebrate them when we're actually talking about things that could improve the phones. So if you purchase a Galaxy S8 Plus and you notice the phone is ridiculously narrow, no, a lot of you out there are not going to say anything about that. What you're going to say is, hey, you know what's interesting about this phone? It's slightly narrow. It's actually ridiculously narrow, and you should actually say that Samsung should change that because you notice such a difference with the phones. I mean, that's one way to talk about it. And another thing about this is that people don't want to say anything about TouchWiz. Again, you guys don't want to anger anyone. I have the Samsung products. I like Samsung. I think these phones are interesting, but I also think the stock version of Android is much better than Tizen or TouchWiz. And I also think that with the way Samsung sells these phones, they should go ahead and make a choice. Use Tizen or TouchWiz, whatever you want to call the OS on your phone, if you're going to sell the phones like this. But if you think that things should change with the phones, and you want to get more Android fans to purchase your phones, then forget about this nonsense with TouchWiz and Tizen. Forget about it. If you really need the Android fans, which I think you do, to purchase your phones. Because when you have this idea that your OS is better, I think you guys continue to try to compete with Google in a way that's not going to work at all. And it doesn't matter how many TouchWiz features you have on that phone, whatever you want to call them. Because what people are looking for when they purchase an Android phone is an Android experience. Anyways, that's what I think about the Samsung Galaxy S8 and S8 Plus. I would like to know what you guys think. Post your comments down below. Let me know what you think about these phones. Would you purchase one of these phones rather than an iPhone? Do you think these are the best phones available? And of course, if you like this video, give a thumbs up. I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace out.